Hello and welcome to this presentation. My name is Daniel Richter from the technical department in CAME Americas. And today we're going to talk about the control board ZLX24S. Last week we talked about the M version. Now this is the S version. Those are control boards for controlling controlling operators for swing gates. And I'm going to show the difference between the two versions. There's a medium version, M, and a special version, the S. Today, I'm going to focus on the S version. And basically, the differences are the other one's a smaller case, has a different display, the functions are different, it has less feature, the other one, and this one has a graphic display. I'm going to show later more about the difference between the two. But basically both do the same, that is controlling operators for swing gates. And I'm going to go overview of a typical installation of a swing gate operator. Obviously we have the operators, it can be one, it can be two, and there's different types. Later I'm going to talk about that. There's a control board, and those operators don't work by itself. They're just motors basically, and with encoders and stuff, but they need a control board. And this is exactly what this board does, the ZLX24S. And we have remote control. Optionally, you can have multiple remote controls to basically open and close the gate. The selector also, it's optional. It's a wired selector, basically a button that you can press to open the gate. That's optionally, some people like that. Warning light is very good to have some kind of light warning that is moving. So people know the machine is working right now or it's in automatic closing. There's a photo cell. Very recommend to have two pairs of photo cells, one in the inside, one in the outside. Basically, if a car is there, it's going to, or a person is going to prevent the gate from closing, or if it's closing, it's going, even if something interrupts the beam, it's going to stop and open again. And later I'm going to show the connections and the configuration of that. From junction box, obviously all the wiring goes in pipes and they're all connected in the junction box. So you can go to the control board. Physical stops, it's very recommended to have physical stops in the gate. So not only for closing, but also for opening. For those cases, have something that stops the gate from moving. Courtesy light, optionally, you can have a light that only turns on when the operator is in operation. And then you can illuminate basically the pathway. So here we have all the types of operators that this control board can manage. There's an articulated arm, all those four models for CAME. They basically can control all 24 volts operators for swing gates that CAME has. In this case, we have an articulated arm. This is basically, yeah, an arm that connects to the gate and that way it opens. There's also a warm drive type of the drive for the operator. We have in here, I'm going to demonstrate later in a few minutes with an axle that is over there in the corner. There's just a different way to control the gate. And there's also an underground operator they call Frog that, like the name says, is going to underground, and that way you don't see even the operator. It's also 24 volts, this one, and so this control board can manage that one. So this control board can manage two type of limit switch, so the types to detect the limit of when it's open and when it's closed. And there's a mechanical or magnetic switch. Depending, for example, there's a Fermi that is very common, very popular, and that uses switches. So you can control the way you adjust the switch, that when it's totally closed, it clicks that switch and then the board knows to stop the energy current to the operator. And there's also another way, mechanical physical stops, that it uses actual stop for the operation, and that way knows that they reached the limit, and it senses that high of current, and that way knows it reached the limit and then stops the operator. And also there's a few with encoders. Actually, the one that I have here is an AXO, and that one uses an encoder and the physical stuff like showing right here. And the difference between the two boards, the S and the M version, and right now I'm going to talk about the S version. That one has a graphic display. The case is bigger. It has a cover for the PCB. It has a connector for, we call it Kami key slot. You can connect a Kami Connect mostly, or a Kami key that basically you can control the operators by the phone, by smartphone, using internet. There's 4 safety inputs for the S version that we have here. The M version only has 2. Both are compatible with a real system. There's a wireless accessory devices for Kame. Also, both have the connection for CXN bus. That is another way to connect accessories. Usually the most popular is the keypad that only using 2 wires, and both have that connector. And the S version only has is the only one that has a clock built in, so you can obviously put the date and time, and that way you can put timers, and that way put it maybe open at 7 a.m. and close to 5 p.m. So you can put different timers and different days. That's something this version has and the other one doesn't. Both had adaptive torque. Basically, is the movement is very fluid and it's always sensing the current from the operator, so it adapts to that. There's also both have virtual encoder. Is a way to basically, with a calibration, even with a motor without encoder, it can simulate basically an encoder, and that way have a sense of where the gate is in the position. Obviously, it's not as accurate as an actual encoder, but in various situations, it's very cool to have. The virtual encoder both have the option, motor setup, both have customizable settings for each motor. So it's very nice for both. And the S version, the one that I have here, it has an output B1, B2. It's a relay that you can program with a remote control or maybe with a timer. It's just a programmable switch, basically, an electrical switch that people use sometimes to control locks, sometimes use it people for lights. So you can control a light with a remote control. It's very customizable. This is the technical data. You can review as you wish. The most relevant thing would be maybe there's 2 versions, one to 30 volts and the other one's 120. I have the one 120. The only difference basically is the transformer, because the actual board is the same. And this is the way I'm going to overview the parts. So this is the line fuse. Obviously, if there's no power on the board, you can check that fuse. There's a power terminal for the mains, and 120. I have it here. I'm going to show later. Terminal for control boards. That's the terminal for controlling devices. It's basically the way you can give commands to the control board. And for example, if you have a selector, you can connect it there. So you can, when you press a button, you open the gate. I'm going to show that later. Don't worry. Terminal for safety devices. This is where you connect the photo cells, safety edges, maybe a loop, a ground loop, or I'm going to show later how you configure that. The terminal for B1, B2, the one I was talking about, there's a relay that you can program. Memory roll card connector, that's a small, very small card that has you can upload all the configurations you have in the board and all the remote controls that you have, and you can upload it there, and then you can unplug it and put it on another board, and then download all that, and so that way you have the configuration and the codes for the remote controls or the keypads. Everything is basically a way to transfer everything inside the memory from one board to another one. Connector for Kami key, that's where you connect the connector I was talking about with Kami Connect. It's the most popular. Display, this one is graphic. Program buttons, we always have 4 buttons for escape, left arrow, right arrow, and enter. I'm going to show you later how you program that. RSE card connector, this is a connector that basically is to plug a small card so you can use a serial communication with another Kami product. A real connect card is a slot where you put another card, and that way you can communicate with accessories compatible with real, which is a totally wireless communication. And connector for the AF card, and that's very popular because if you want to use a remote control, then you need to connect this AF card in this slot. Make sure to have it there. Earth connection for safety, make sure to use that. Connection for CRP connection. I was telling about that you have a serial communication so you can connect different devices. Well, you need to put the RSE card that I was talking about, and then this is the connector for that communication, serial communication. Similar for connecting the antenna, and they don't come with an antenna, but if you they actually work without an antenna, but if you want to increase the range for the remote control, you can put maybe a wire there or an actual antenna. You can put it with a coaxial cable and then the actual antenna, so you can increase the range by considerably. This is terminal for bus devices. This is accessories for serial communication. It has two wires. For those two wires has not only energy, but it gives you the communication with the board. So you can put the different devices there. Terminal for limit switches. If your operator uses limit switches, you're going to connect it in those two, depending if you have only one operator. I'll show you later how you connect motors, operators. This one is different. So this one is also where you connect the operator, but this one is actually the motor, M2 and N2 is the one I have here, and encoder. This is the axle, so it has 3 cables for that one. And so this is the connectors for the actual motor operator. I'll show you later that way. Accessory fuse, that fuse basically you have to check it if there's no power to the accessories. Controllable fuse, if the board doesn't turn on, also you can check that fuse. Terminal for connecting a signal devices, that's the lights, the warning lights, all the indicators, basic outputs, all the outputs for indications, it goes there. Terminal for power supply for control board, that's where the power goes to the control board from the transformer, and that's the actual transformer. And so installation, this is a very basic overview. I'm not going to go too deep in this because the manual shows exactly the steps, but I'm going to show this, the basic step. You have to remove the board so it has more space so you can put screws. Actually, I can show you right now with the actual board that I have over here. I have an axle over there. There's an axle operator, and I have it connected here, these 3 connectors. And I was going to show the installation. You can take it out this way. It's very simple. I like it because you can put the wiring and behind. You can also have a space for accessories. The M version doesn't have this much space, so that's why this one is nice. And that's why the case is bigger. And there's a DIMM that comes with this, so you can screw it directly to the wall, then hook this box to this, and then put more screws so it's easier to install. That's why you don't have to fight with the gravity while you doing the screws to the wall. And going to keep with the presentation. So they're showing that. And then you put the screws, and also you can do the holes on the bottom and put the pipes with the wiring. And there's a slot in behind, so you can also put cables from the bottom to the top. It's really nice. Obviously, after all that, you put the board again, and then you connect the mains, the 120 volts in this case. Don't forget to connect also the earth. And this is more interesting, the connections. So connections, you have power between 10 and 11. It shows that it has 24 volts AC. When it's in battery backup, that's an accessory. But if you put batteries with a backup, then those 2 pins now, instead of being AC, is going to be DC, with the 10 being the positive and 11 being negative. It's not that relevant because usually accessories can receive AC and DC without any problem, but just wanted to point it out. So remember, pins 10 and 11 gives you 24 volts always. always power for accessories, for loops, for any kind of receiver, whatever you want. And also shows the connection for electric locks. It's going to send power for around 2 seconds, 3 seconds. You can configure that. And to unlock, it's going to send power just to unlock. If you have another type of lock, you have to use relays or something else. But this one is just sends volts, 12 volts, AC or DC, AC usually. And it sends 12 volts for a few seconds before opening. Usually it's that way. You can configure that part. You can use one lock or two. That's the way you connect it. This is the way you connect the motors. That's the one I have here, the axle. It's just M1 and M1, M as Mike, N as November. That's basically the motor. The actual DC motor goes directly to there. One of the tests sometimes we do is unplug this from the board, and then you apply with a battery, apply voltage directly to the operator. And that way you can test if the operator actually works. That's one of the tests. This shows when you have two operators connected. In my case, only have one. And if you only have one, you connect it the way I have it here. There is only M2 and 2. That's something to make sure to don't confuse. This is where you connect the motor number 1, and this is where you connect the motor number 2. This is the limit switches for number 1 and limit switches for number 2. In this case, this operator doesn't use limit switches, so that's why there's nothing connected. And this one only has the M and N, which is the motor itself, and this third one is an encoder. Only has one cable for encoder. Some others have 3 cables for encoders that are connected there also. But the thing that I want to point out is that if you have only one motor, you connect it in M2, not M1, okay? So I'm going to continue. Okay. So this is a connection, similar connection, but this one doesn't have an encoder, or maybe the encoder broke or whatever. We call it this generic way to control the operator. Actually, in the types, you can choose generic. That uses a virtual encoder we were talking about. There is an estimate of where the gate is. You do a calibration, obviously, at the beginning. And after doing that calibration, it's going to estimate where the gate is. So that's the way you will connect it. And if you connect only one motor, obviously it will be only an M2 and N2, only that, if it's only one motor. If you use two operators, it's very common to have these obstructions that one interfere with the other one. So that way, then because of that, usually when it opens, the M2 opens first, and it has a delay on the M and the motor number 1. Let's call it motor number 1. So it has a delay, and motor number 2 will open first, and then the motor number 1. And same for closing. Usually you will need the motor number 1 to close first, and after a few seconds, the motor number 2 close, so they don't interfere when they get. So one thing that I wanted to point out, because by default it comes like that. If you put two operators, there's going to be a delay between those two, because of what I'm explaining. So if they don't interfere, if your gate doesn't interfere with each other, then you can disable this timing delay. Later, I will show you on the configuration how you do it, but I just wanted to point that out. This is the connections for any selector, commands, external receivers. It's a way to control the actual commands, actually giving an open command, closing command, stop command. And this is the way you can connect it depending on what you want. The first one is total stop. That is normally closed. From this is the only one that is normally closed to contact. That's for safety, that's why. And if you enable this, you need the contact to be closed. Actually, it's the pin 1 and 2. Between pins 1 and 2, you need to leave that contact closed to get the operator working. And if you open that contact, the operator is going to be disabled, basically. It's not going to move. So if you enable that, by default, it comes disabled, so you don't need to worry about that. And in the diagram, we show number 2 is for opening only. It's going to give a command for opening. Again, everything works with the command that is pin number 2. Pin number 2 is in CAM is always the common, and we use it all the time for giving commands for photo cells, so remember that. So you see everything there, for example, is connected to pin number 2. And in this case, for opening would be between 2 and pin 3. You give a pulse there and it's going to open. Same for the other one that is 3P. That's for partial opening, that opens only one gate or opens the gate only partially, maybe for a person to pass instead of a car. So that's another option. There's a pin number 4 that is for closing only. That's between pin 2 and 4. It gives a pulse and the gate will close. And for 5, that is basically pin 7. That's for open and closing. Open and closing, you give pulse and you just do the opposite of what it's doing. Or you can also configure to open and then stop and then close and then stop, for example. It's very, very cool pin. There's the connections for lights, warning lights. There's 3 ways to give indication, basically outputs. The most common is 10 and E. That gives only 24 volts. It gives 24 volts for between 10 and E. It's 24 volts when it's moving the gate. Also very common is 10 and 5. 10 and 5 gives volts all the time, except when it's closed. It gives 24 volts. And you can put a relay maybe for a electric magnetic lock, for example. Sometimes people do that, but you need a relay there, an external power supply. And just the way outputs to indicate how the gate is doing, what's the position, if it's open, closed. It's also configurable in the configuration, the menu. This is the way to connect photo cells. So photo cells basically need power and they give a normally closed contact. The power in this case is given by pin 10 and 2, but some photo cells you can connect to also 10 and 11. But in this case, depends on the photo cell. So I had to follow the diagram for your photo cell. In this case, we have power between 10 and 2. And also the contact, normally close contact, we can connect between 2 and CX or any other pins. This one has 4 inputs. So you can connect either one, and then you enable that particular one you connected. You can enable it in the menu. I'll show you later how to do that. And this is the way we configure everything, is with a display and the 4 buttons: escape, left arrow, right arrow, and enter. Going to actually show exactly that right now. So there's a configuration wizard that we're going to follow, which makes everything even more simple than normal menu, because you can go to the menu and manually go to each function, but this one is very cool. So let's see. I have this wire just for testing. Later I'm going to you see why. So to enter the menu, just press enter. It's asking for calibration needed. I'm not going to actually start right now yet. Then you can go to each of the menu. There's only these items. So mostly we use configuration, but you can see there. So if you go to configuration, enter, we're in configuration, go left, you see the wizard that I was talking about. So let's go to start that wizard. So the wizard is going to go step by step with most basic configurations. For now, right now it's asking for a number of motors. M1 and M2 would be that we have 2 motors. Since I only have 1, I'm going to choose only M2 because it's connected in M2. I was saying like here, this is M1, M2. So it's connected because it's only 1, you connect it in M2. Don't get confused with that. That's why I tried to point out that part. So, okay, we're M2. So press enter to confirm. Save the data. Now asking for the type of motor, operator. There's many types here. The generic one will be without the encoder, so nothing, just the virtual encoder. But I have the axle here that actually has an encoder, so I'll use that axle. Press enter. Then it's asking for testing the motor. So if you hold the left arrow, it's going to open motor number 1. There's no motor connector in number 1, so obviously I only hear the click of the relay. But if I hold the right arrow, it's going to open motor number 2. that is actually doing that. While I hold it, I hope you can hear the operator working. It's going to always open when you hold this. So if it's closing, that means that you have to revert. In this case, you have to revert this one, these two, but depends on the operator. So you have to see the instruction of the operator to how to revert the direction of opening. So that's why it shows this as a step, because you have to check if the operator is connected correctly. Since right now it's opening correctly, so I press enter. The next step is enable input, safety inputs. And like I told you, it has 4 inputs, and one is CX, CY, CZ, and CK. And for now, I'm not going to use this, so I'm going to leave it off. This is for the other input, I'm going to leave it off. This is another input, I'm going to leave it off, and the last input also off. So it's asking you to add users. Basically, that's remote controls. Yes, I want to add a remote control. Make sure you have the AF card like I showed before. AF card is connected. So because in that way you can receive the signal of the remote control. I have one over here. And step by step is basically it's asking what you want the button to do. Just open or partially opening, or you can control the relay that I was talking about, the B1, B2. You can control it with if you want to control that with the button, or you want to do step by step. Step by step will be open, and you press again, it's closed, and you open again, it's open. So it's just changing the state. Sequential is basically the same, but you can stop also. You can open, then you press again, it stops and stay still. You press again, it closes, and you press again, stops. So that's very common. So I will leave that. And when you press enter and you confirm what you want to do, you press the remote control. I already have programmed that remote control. So this says they already programmed. So it's waiting for another remote control. So you can program actually 250 users, so maximum. Then since I already programmed the remote control, the last step would be calibration, trouble calibration. That will, if you press yes, it's going to close the operators. If you had to, we will do the same for both. It's just closing. It's actually showing CL as closing M2. And now it's opening motor number 2. It's doing it slowly because it's doing a calibration. That's normal. So basically what it's doing is learning the travel, and because it has an encoder, so it needs to learn how much revolution it's doing for the entire travel. That's why we're doing always in the beginning, we always do a calibration. You only have to do it once. Calibration completed. So now it's saying that the gate is open, and we're talking about motor number 2. And now we can see, for example, let me show you a few things. For example, now there's everything configured. I can show you the commands, the command with this cable. Like I said before, pin number 2 is a command, and you have a wire there. So if we give a pulse between 2 and 3, it's going to where now it's open. So we go, let's do it with 4. 4 was closing. So if I close that contact, then it starts closing. And now it's closing. And if I give a pulse between 2 and 3, it now opens. So that's the way to give commands for opening and closing. And you can revert the action with 2 and 7. Focus this. There you go. So that was for giving commands. You can put a external receiver, maybe a free exit. You can connect between 2 and 3. And in this case, so I have also the photo cells. But to use the photo cell and to demonstrate that, I will have to enable that photo cell. So let's enable it. Remember the steps I didn't enable it in configurations. Then let's wire safety devices. And then those stuff now, input CX. Okay, let's play with CX. And I'm going to enable it. And there's many functions for that input. What I'm going, the most common one is C1, so I'm going to use that. C1 would be while it's closing, and if something comes in the way for the beam, it's going to open the gate. So reopen while closing, we call it. So I enable CX in C1, okay? So remember that. So since it's a normally closed contact, and right now I don't have connected anything in CX, that's why it's giving the error in the menu, it's giving the error C1. And actually, if I try to close the gate with 4, between 2 and 4, it's not closing. It's because that contact is open. But when I close that contact between 2 and CX, you see that error goes away. And now I can close the gate fine. But if I open that contact, stops and opens again. There you go. So that's the most common way to use photo cells, and you see in many ways. So I'll disable now that is in configurations, wire safety devices, and CX. I'm going to disable it off. To show that you can, there's 4 inputs, so you do it individually. There's also very common to use automatic closing. So let's do that. For example, enter configuration. I think in times, enter. It's automatic closing. Press enter, and then right now it's disabled, but I can enable and put it the amount of seconds. Let's put 6%. So when I do a command for close, right now it's open, but I'm going to close, and then I'm going to open with between 2 and 3. So you see that it's opening, and when you reach the limit for opening, you reach the limit, you see the seconds over here. So it's right now by itself, it's going to close. And it closes by itself. You can press escape if you want to stop, or you can do this for closing and this for opening. So what else is very common? You maybe want to change the speed of the motor. By default, it comes by 70%. So let me show that. Configurations and motors, no, it's run settings, enter. Opening speed. So right now it's by default it's 70%, but I changed it before. So it by default comes in 70%. So if you want to change that, you put it in 100%, and it's going to open at full speed. And same for closing. For closing, it by default comes in 70%, but maybe you want to put in 100%. I mentioned that because sometimes people think the motors are going too slow, but it's because by default it comes 70%. Something you also want to change is the delay I was talking about before. If the gates lap each other like that, one opens before the other one, but there's no overlapping, if there's no obstruction between them, then you can disable that delay. You can do that if this focus there. Let's do that in configuration, in times, and there's no, there's let's see, in configuration, run setting, no, in times. Let's see. It's because it has only one motor. Okay, I'm going to show that, but I need to set that I have 2 motors, obviously. Motors, I only have 1, but I need to put 2. Press save. Now I'm telling the board that I have 2 motors, even though I don't have it, but I want to show you the option for times. And then you see the option M1 open delay. So that's the delay for the motor number 1 to open, and right now it's off, but by default it's 2. I've been playing with this board, so that's why it's not by default. Well, by default it's going to be in 2, and maybe you don't want that delay, so put it in off and press enter. And same for M2 close delay. That's the way it says, the delay for M2 to close. By default is 2, but if you don't want that because they don't overlap each other, then you turn it off, and that's it. Both are going to open and close at the same time. And basically that's the most things that are like change, more useful, more basic installation. You done with installation already. And this one has a timer, so I can also show you that. Actually, the timer is over here. Timer settings. So you can show the clock. Right now I have it in a different, the time is not correct. Set the clock. You can create a new timer. For example, the timer, you can put it to open. You put the time where you want it to open. Then you put the time where you want it to close again. Basically stop that state. And then you put a whole week, or select the days, or you can select at least the days, so let's put the entire week. So now you have that timer, and actually shows that icon showing that it has a timer. You can put different timers to do what you want. You can also control the B1, B2 input here, the relay. And I think that's it. So thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions or problems, or you can always contact us with technical support, or we're always available here for helping. We're always doing these kind of trainings and webinars, and we try to always keep you informed, and that way you make the best decisions and don't have to hassle too much. Oh, these operators have been coming better and better, so it's getting easier with this kind of controlling menus and displays. But anyway, so let us know if you have any questions, and see you on the next time. Bye bye.